He controlled billion-dollar mergers with a single phone call. But tonight, at a table worth more than some people's rent, Marcus Whitfield could not convince his own son to eat a single bite. The restaurant, Leonard, shimmered with crystal light. Velvet booths curved like stage curtains, and waiters glided between tables as if in some silent ballet. The smell of butter and lobster filled the air, yet at Marcus's table, the boy in front of him sat curled in on himself, rocking gently, untouched by all of it. Jaime, 8 years old, silent for 2, his small frame barely dented the velvet cushion. His hands moved in restless circles on the white linen, his eyes fixed somewhere far away, anywhere but here. Before him, a $200 lobster dish cooled, the steam fading as fast as Marcus's patience. Marcus sat stiff, every crease in his Italian suit a symbol of control. Yet no amount of control mattered here. Every whisper from nearby tables, every glance filled with judgment, cut deeper than he cared to admit. People weren't subtle. He could hear them. Poor parenting, spoiled, can't he handle his own kid? Jaime, Marcus whispered, leaning forward so only the boy could hear. Please, just one bite. People are watching. Jaime rocked harder, hands clamped to his ears, shutting out the restaurant's low jazz music, shutting out everything, including his father. Marcus reached across the table, hesitating before trying again to coax the fork into his son's hand. Jaime pulled away violently, the silverware clattering like a cymbal on the polished floor. Heads turned, conversations paused. Somewhere in the corner, someone snickered. Marcus's jaw locked. He was used to winning. He was used to dominance, to taking control of any room. But here, at this table, he was powerless. And then, she came. At first, Marcus barely noticed her, a waitress moving between tables with quiet grace. But as she approached, her presence was undeniable. She carried no tray this time, only a calmness that felt entirely out of place amid the clinking glasses and brittle laughter. Without asking permission, she knelt down beside Jaime's chair. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though she was stepping into another world. She didn't speak to Marcus. She didn't even look at him. All her attention went to the boy. She began to hum. The sound was so soft it almost disappeared beneath the hum of the restaurant, but Marcus heard it, a simple melody. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, yet not as he remembered. She bent it into minor keys, the rhythm matching Jaime's rocking, and Jaime heard it too. His hands paused mid-air. His rocking slowed. His eyes, those restless, darting eyes, lifted hesitant and found hers. The world seemed to narrow, every other sound dissolving. For a moment, there was only the boy and the woman kneeling at his side, humming a lullaby that sounded like it had been written just for him. She reached toward his plate, picked up a small piece of lobster, and, still humming, moved it in a slow circle, mimicking the pattern Jaime had been tracing moments before. The food danced. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation. Jaime's fingers hovered, trembling. Then, like the smallest of miracles, he leaned forward and opened his mouth. Marcus forgot to breathe. The piece of lobster disappeared between Jaime's lips, then another, and another. The boy who hadn't eaten in front of anyone for months was now calmly taking food from the hands of a stranger. For a long while, Marcus could only watch. His phone, still glowing beside him on the table, was forgotten. The whispers of the other diners faded. All that mattered was this impossible scene, a boy he could not reach, finding comfort in the presence of someone he didn't even know. When the last bite was gone, Jaime sat back, eyes still fixed on the woman. She brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, her expression tender but matter-of-fact, as if this was nothing unusual. Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out rough. How did you do that?" The woman rose slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time. Her gaze was steady, calm. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "you have to learn their song before they can hear yours." She left as silently as she came, disappearing into the flow of the restaurant, leaving Marcus with an untouched glass of wine and a son who, for the first time in years, sat still and at peace. Marcus leaned back, stunned, the question already burning. Who was she? He didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. Long before the soft hum of a waitress cracked his armor, Marcus Whitfield had lived in a world that bent to his will. The elevator climbed 60 floors in absolute silence. The polished steel mirrored his own rigid stance, tall, perfectly groomed, a man carved out of marble. When the doors opened, they revealed his kingdom, a corner office suspended in the sky with glass walls that framed the city like a chessboard waiting for his next move. From up here, people were pawns, deals were battles, and Marcus always won. Yet in that same office, on that same night, with the sun bleeding into the horizon, the weight of defeat pressed on him. He stood at the window, phone in hand, reading the reminder on his calendar. Dinner with Jaime. The phrase should have brought him joy. Instead, it felt like another appointment to survive. He muttered to himself, almost inaudible, "Another dinner, another hour pretending I know how to reach you." Behind him, his assistant's voice came soft, as if careful not to disturb a fragile sculpture. "Mr. Whitfield, the car is ready whenever you are." He nodded, not turning around. The city stretched out beneath him, but none of it mattered. None of the contracts, the stocks, the acquisitions. Somewhere out there was a boy who refused to look him in the eyes, and no amount of money could buy a way back in. Miles away, in a cramped break room behind the glittering facade of Leonard, Kesha Williams tied the thin strings of her apron. The mirror she faced was cracked, but it still showed a tired woman with a steady gaze. Her hands, rough from carrying trays and wiping tables, moved with practiced efficiency. She checked her hair, smoothed the fabric over her hips, and forced herself to smile. 10 years earlier, those same hands had been covered in colorful chalk, guiding small fingers to form letters. She had once believed education could change the world. She had once been called Miss Williams by children who needed her to believe in them. Now those days were gone, cut away like the funding that had closed the doors of her classroom forever. She whispered under her breath, "Just one more shift. One more table." Out on the streets, Jaime Whitfield pressed his small face against the tinted window of the Mercedes as it sliced through traffic. Neon lights blurred into rivers of color he couldn't touch. His hands traced shapes on the glass. Circles, stars, patterns that made sense only to him. Inside the restaurant, the evening unfolded in the same pattern it always did. The maitre d' led Marcus and Jaime to their corner booth, far from the main dining room. Jaime immediately curled into himself, hands covering his ears against the faint sound of the piano. Marcus ordered for both of them in a clipped, efficient tone that didn't invite questions. When Kesha appeared with a notepad, he barely glanced up. "The usual for the child," Marcus said, tapping at his phone. "Not too hot. He's particular." Kesha nodded, but her eyes lingered on the boy. She noticed the way his small shoulders tensed at every sound, the way his fingers gripped the edge of the table as if bracing against an invisible tide. When the food came, the ritual began. Marcus leaned forward, his voice low, coaxing and bargaining. Jaime hummed softly, retreating farther. Forks stayed untouched. Lobster cooled. The air thickened with unspoken frustration. From across the room, Kesha watched. Something inside her stirred, a memory of another boy in another time, rocking in a chair, waiting for someone to understand that his silence was not refusal, but fear. She crossed the floor with careful steps, aware of every glance following her. She stopped beside Jaime's chair, kneeling so she wouldn't tower over him. Her voice, quiet enough that only the boy could hear, asked, "May I sit here for a moment?" Marcus looked up, startled. "What are you doing?" he said sharply. She didn't look at him. "Just give me a minute," she said gently. Then she began to hum, the same soft tune, the same rhythm as his rocking. Jaime's humming changed, shifted to match hers. His small hands stilled and his eyes lifted. Marcus froze. He was watching the same impossible thing happen again. And in that instant, for the first time in years, hope found a crack in the glass walls Marcus had built around himself. He had no idea who this woman was, only that she could reach his son in ways he never could. The meal ended differently that night. Jaime had eaten, calm, focused, almost peaceful. As they walked back to the car, Marcus kept replaying the moment in his head. He murmured under his breath, "I don't even know your name." He didn't realize yet that he would make sure he found out. The next week, Marcus returned to Leonard, and then again, and again. At first, it was nothing more than an experiment. He told himself it was coincidence that he always requested the same table, in the same quiet corner, hoping for the same waitress. But deep down, he knew better. He had seen a door open in his son's silent world, and he would do anything to keep it from closing. Each visit followed a rhythm. Jaime sat, his small body folding in on itself as the restaurant's hum pressed in around him. Marcus ordered, clipped and efficient, while Kesha appeared, her presence a calm counterpoint to the chaos. On the third evening, Marcus finally spoke to her directly. His voice was low, cautious, as though the words might shatter if spoken too loud. "You're good with him," he said, eyes on his son instead of her. "Where did you learn that?" Kesha was setting down a glass of water, her movements smooth and unhurried. She glanced up just long enough to meet his gaze. "Practice," she answered simply, and then walked away. No explanation, no elaboration, just practice. Marcus found himself staring after her, more curious than ever. The following week, the miracle happened again. Jaime ate, bite by bite, as Kesha hummed softly, her hand moving food in the same small patterns the boy traced with his fingers. She never forced him. She waited. And he always came to her. It became a ritual. Marcus would watch, trying to memorize every subtle motion, the angle of her shoulders, the softness in her voice, the way she lowered her gaze so Jaime could meet her eyes without feeling trapped. It was like watching someone speak a language he had never learned. One night, as they left, Marcus stopped beside the table. He spoke without his usual sharpness. "Thank you," he said quietly, his hand tightening around Jaime's. Kesha simply nodded. "He's a good kid," she said. "He hasn't eaten like this for months," Marcus admitted, the words tasting strange, like something he wasn't used to saying aloud. Kesha's eyes softened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she looked at Jaime. "See you soon, little star," she said gently. Marcus carried those words home. Week after week, their small corner of the restaurant became something else entirely. A sanctuary. Marcus started adjusting his habits, silencing his phone, dimming its screen, learning to keep his voice low. He noticed how the smallest things, a sudden light, a loud sound, would send Jaime spiraling, and how small adjustments could bring him back. Kesha noticed too. She saw the change in Marcus. The stiffness in his posture softened. The hard line of his mouth gave way to a quieter expression, something closer to humility. One evening, halfway through another quiet meal, Jaime surprised them both. Kesha had been humming, moving a bite of food gently toward him. As she did, his small hand reached forward and rested on hers. It wasn't much, just a touch. But for Jaime, it was a gesture as rare as rain in a desert. Marcus inhaled sharply. "Did you see that?" he asked, turning to Kesha as if to confirm he wasn't imagining it. She smiled softly. "He trusts you being here. That's what this means," she said, keeping her voice steady so as not to startle the boy. Marcus sat back, struggling to process the moment. A simple touch, and yet it felt as if something monumental had shifted inside him. As the night went on, Marcus found himself speaking again, quietly so only she could hear. "I don't know how you do this," he said, watching Jaime chew slowly. "I've spent 2 years with specialists, private tutors, everything money can buy, and nothing works. Then you come in and he just opens." Kesha looked at the boy before answering. "Because it's not about fixing him," she said. "It's about meeting him where he already is." There was a silence between them then, but it was not an uncomfortable one. It was full, like the air just before a song begins. By the time Marcus and Jaime stepped out into the night, a fine drizzle was falling on the city. Marcus tightened his grip on his son's hand, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was holding on to something real. He glanced back at the restaurant, at the window, where a faint shadow still moved inside. He didn't know much about Kesha Williams yet, only that she was changing everything, and soon he would start to wonder what it had cost her to know so much. It was a rainy evening when Marcus finally asked the question that had been circling in his mind for weeks. The restaurant was quieter than usual, with only a handful of tables filled. Jaime was tracing little spirals on the tablecloth, calmer than he had been in a long time, while Kesha placed a plate in front of him. Marcus waited until she straightened up. His voice was low, stripped of the commanding tone it usually carried. He said, "I need to know something. Before all this, before here, what did you do?" Kesha looked at him for a moment, and then, instead of answering right away, she crouched down beside Jaime. She helped him guide the fork to his mouth, waited for him to chew, and only after he was settled did she speak. "I taught," she said at last. Marcus frowned slightly. "Taught?" he asked. "I ran a learning center," she explained, her voice soft but steady. "Special education, kids like Jaime, kids who see the world differently. That was my life for 8 years. Something inside Marcus shifted at her words. "And what happened?" he asked. Her expression darkened, though she kept it calm for Jaime's sake. "Funding," she said simply. "One day we had a classroom. The next the money was gone. The doors closed. I did what I had to do. Ended up here." Marcus wanted to ask more, but something about the way she returned her focus to Jaime made him hold back. There was weight in her voice, weight he recognized because it sounded a lot like regret. That night, after taking Jaime home and putting him to bed, Marcus sat alone in his study. His walls were lined with polished wood, his desk immaculate, but he felt surrounded by ghosts. Her words kept repeating in his head. "One day we had a classroom. The next, the money was gone." It pulled him back 5 years to a boardroom that smelled of leather and ambition. Numbers glowed on a large screen at the head of the table, division performance reports. Education had been in decline for years, a drain on resources. Marcus had sat at the head of the table, listening to his executives present the data. One of them had said, "The special needs programs are eating into the margins. They're not cost-effective." Marcus had leaned back in his chair, his voice calm, almost detached. "Cut them. Focus on mainstream initiatives. If it's not profitable, we don't need it." The decision had been signed off in less than 10 minutes. Just a signature, a stroke of a pen. It hadn't seemed important at the time, and now, 5 years later, the image of that same pen burned in his memory. He could see the faces of the executives. He could hear himself saying it. And he could see Kesha's calm eyes across the table at Leonard, telling him how everything had been taken away from her. He whispered into the empty room, "I did this." The next morning, he found himself staring at Jaime during breakfast, watching the boy as he slowly moved his cereal around the bowl without eating. All he could think was how much time had been lost because of choices he'd made long before that diagnosis. If those programs had survived, would Jaime have found help earlier? Would his own son have been less alone? That night, back at the restaurant, Marcus didn't touch his phone. He didn't even open the menu. He watched Kesha quietly as she guided Jaime through the same calming routine she had built over the past weeks. When the boy was finally settled, Marcus spoke again. He said, "I want to fix what I broke. I don't know how yet, but I will." Kesha glanced at him, but didn't say anything. Her hand continued to guide Jaime's fork, steady and patient. Only after Jaime swallowed did she reply. "You can start by learning his language," she said. "The rest comes after." As they left that evening, Marcus felt the rain on his face. Each drop felt heavier than it should have. He wasn't sure if he was more haunted by the past or more terrified of the work that lay ahead. But for the first time, he didn't look away. The story of the billionaire and the mysterious waitress did not stay inside the quiet corners of Leonard for long. One evening, as Marcus and Jaime stepped out of the restaurant, flashes exploded around them. Reporters had gathered, shouting questions, their cameras catching every step. A voice from the crowd called out, "Mr. Whitfield, who is the woman your son only eats with?" Marcus shielded Jaime with his arm, pulling him toward the waiting car without answering. The cameras caught everything anyway. The small boy burying his face in his father's jacket, the tall waitress watching from the doorway, confusion in her eyes. By morning, the photographs were everywhere. Headlines painted an easy story. Whitfield's waitress whisperer, when money can't buy parenting. Gossip shows picked apart every detail. In a penthouse across the ocean, Margaret Sinclair scrolled through the pictures, her manicured finger flicking across the screen with growing interest. Champagne bubbles rose in her glass as she smiled thinly. She called her lawyer, her voice cold as glass. She said, "I want custody of our son. These pictures prove everything. He's dragging Jaime into some inappropriate mess with a waitress." The lawyer hesitated. "Margaret, the courts will need more than photographs." "Then we'll give them more," she said sharply. "I want my son out of there. I want to destroy this woman and remind Marcus who really holds power." While back in the city, Kesha felt the impact almost immediately. Within a week, management at Leonard called her in. The manager's tone was apologetic but firm. "You're one of our best, Kesha," he said, avoiding her eyes. "But the attention is hurting business. Reporters out front every night, customers complaining. We can't keep dealing with this. Take some time off until things cool down." She asked quietly, "Without pay?" He nodded once. She left without arguing. It wasn't worth it. But the silence that followed was heavy. The very next evening, Marcus tried to follow the routine alone. Jaime sat in the booth, rocking harder than he had in months, refusing every bite Marcus offered. No humming could coax him now. Marcus leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. He said, "Please, Jaime, just one bite. She'll be back soon. I promise." But the boy pressed his hands over his ears, shutting everything out. The next morning, as Marcus read the formal notice of a custody hearing, exhaustion hung over him like a fog. His lawyer sat across the polished desk, papers in hand. "Margaret is claiming that you've created an unstable environment," the lawyer explained. "She's arguing that you've outsourced parenting to a waitress, that this is inappropriate and confusing for Jaime." Marcus rubbed his temples, staring at the floor. "She left him," he said. "She walked out on him when things got hard. Now she wants him back because of some pictures." "She sees an opening," the lawyer replied, and Marcus, Those photos do look bad to a court. She's going to use them. She'll make this about money, about class, about race. You need to prepare for that." Marcus stood abruptly and crossed to the window. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. A man who could buy almost anything, but who couldn't buy the one thing that mattered. He said, "I won't distance myself from Kesha. She's the only reason my son started eating again. If Margaret wants a fight, she'll get one." The lawyer sighed. "Then we'll need her to testify, if she's willing." For 3 nights in a row, Marcus tried to call Kesha. She didn't answer. On the 4th day, he went to the restaurant. Her section was empty. No one knew when she would return. Meanwhile, Jaime stopped eating altogether. Without her, his small world shrank again, and Marcus could feel himself losing him all over. On the evening before the court date, Marcus sat beside Jaime's bed, holding the boy's thin hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time. "I don't know how to do this without her." Jaime didn't answer. He turned away, retreating into a silence Marcus feared might swallow them both. And somewhere across town, Kesha lay awake, staring at her ceiling, wondering if she could step back into a world she had tried so hard to leave behind. The courthouse was a storm of camera flashes. Reporters called out questions as Marcus guided Jaime through the crowd, his free hand shielding the boy's face. Inside, the noise became a hushed tension. Margaret sat in the front row, immaculate as ever, a designer suit framing a sharp smile. Beside her, her lawyers whispered like vultures waiting for the right moment to descend. Marcus kept Jaime close. The boy clung to his father's jacket, eyes darting everywhere. Every sound was too loud. Every movement was too fast. The judge entered. The room rose. Then the battle began. Margaret's lawyer was the first to speak. He gestured to a large photograph displayed for the court, Marcus and Jaime at the restaurant, Kesha leaning close as she fed the boy. "This," the lawyer said, his voice ringing clear, "is not parenting. This is dependency on an unqualified stranger. This waitress, someone with no relationship to the child, has been allowed to fill a parental role, with cameras and gossip magazines documenting the inappropriate closeness." Marcus sat silent, his jaw set like stone. The lawyer continued, "This is evidence of instability, of poor judgment, and it is our responsibility to protect Jaime from this chaotic environment." Then it was Marcus's lawyer's turn. He stood and said firmly, "You call it instability. I call it connection. This woman has been the first person in 2 years to reach this boy, not a teacher, not a therapist, not a doctor, and certainly not his mother, who left." The courtroom stirred at that. Margaret's face tightened, but she kept her gaze forward. Finally, the judge turned toward Marcus's side. "Call your witness," the judge said. The heavy wooden door at the back of the courtroom opened. Kesha stepped in. Her dress was plain, her hands steady. She walked past the rows of eyes watching her, past the clicking cameras, and stopped at the witness stand. She took the oath, then sat, her back straight, her chin level. Margaret's lawyer began with a sharp tone. "Miss Williams, what is your relationship with the defendant?" Kesha looked at him calmly and answered, "I serve them food when they come to the restaurant." "And outside of that?" She turned her head to look at Jaime. Her voice softened. "I try to help." The lawyer pressed harder. "Do you consider yourself a caregiver to this child?" Kesha did not flinch. "I consider myself someone who sees him," she said. The lawyer arched a brow. "Tell the court your qualifications. What makes you believe you can do for this boy what teams of specialists could not?" She took a breath. "My name is Kesha Williams," she said clearly, so the entire courtroom could hear. I have a master's degree in special education from Columbia University. For 8 years, I directed the Riverside Learning Center, a place for children with autism, ADHD, and other developmental delays. I taught over 200 children how to communicate, how to feel safe, how to believe in themselves. The courtroom went silent. Then the funding was cut, she continued. The center closed. And the company that made that decision, the one that ended our programs, was Whitfield Industries. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. He had known it. Hearing it said out loud, though, was like a blade turning. Keisha did not look at him. She kept speaking. So yes, I know how to help Jaime eat. I know how to calm him when the world overwhelms him, because I have spent my life learning that children like Jaime are not broken. They just need someone to listen. And when the world stopped paying me to do that, I didn't stop. I carried those skills with me, even into a restaurant. Then, turning to Margaret, she said, "You want to know why he calls me Mama Keisha? Because I am the first person in his life who treated him as a gift, not a burden." A murmur ran through the courtroom. And at that moment, a soft voice came from the front row. It was Jaime. He had stood up, tiny hands clenched, his voice trembling but clear. He said, "Mama Keisha, hungry?" It was only 3 words, but for a boy who had been silent for 2 years, it was everything. The room froze. Reporters forgot to breathe. Margaret's composure cracked. Marcus closed his eyes, tears finally breaking free. The judge struck the gavel once, but the sound was drowned out by the hum of something far greater. Hope. The gavel came down again, harder this time. The judge's voice cut through the murmurs. "Order," the judge said. "This court will come to order." Margaret's lawyer tried to recover, shuffling his papers, but the spell had already been cast. Everyone in that room had heard the boy speak, and no argument could take that moment away. After a long pause, the judge leaned forward. "I have heard enough," the judge said. "It is the ruling of this court that custody will remain with Mr. Whitfield. However, the court requires immediate enrollment in family therapy, a structured care plan, and specialized services for Jaime. This is not negotiable." Margaret shot to her feet. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice sharp and rising. "He's putting our child in the hands of that woman," the judge interrupted firmly. "This hearing is over, Mrs. Sinclair. Your personal grievances have no place here. Bailiff, clear the court." Reporters swarmed outside, but inside the heavy wooden doors there was a moment of stillness. Marcus sat for a long time, letting the words sink in. Jaime, exhausted by the noise, leaned against him and closed his eyes. When they finally stepped out of the building, Marcus asked his lawyer to take Jaime home. Then, without speaking to anyone else, he went back inside and searched for Keisha. He found her sitting on the courthouse steps, apart from the crowd, her hands resting on her knees. She looked drained, her shoulders slumped, but when she saw him, she didn't move. He sat down beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. The street below buzzed with cameras and traffic, but up here there was only quiet. Finally, Marcus said, "I owe you more than thanks." He looked down at his hands, at the lines on his palms, and said softly, "I owe you an apology." Keisha tilted her head slightly, waiting. "I'm sorry for what my company did," he said. "I'm sorry for what I took from you, from your students, from my own son without even knowing it. And I'm sorry that it took me this long to see what was right in front of me." She listened, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she said, "Your apology doesn't give me back those 8 years." Her tone wasn't cruel, only truthful. "But maybe it's a start." Marcus nodded slowly. "I want to fix this," he said. "Not just for Jaime. For all the children like him, and for teachers like you who should never have been forced out." She turned her eyes on him, studying his face. "Fixing it will take more than money," she said. "I know," Marcus answered. "But money can build something. I want you to run it. A new foundation, neurodevelopmental support, full control, your vision, unlimited budget. You won't answer to anyone but the children you're helping." Kesha raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think I would trust you enough to do that?" "Because," Marcus said quietly, "you gave me back my son, and I've finally learned that I can't do this alone." For a long moment she just looked at him. He didn't rush her, didn't try to fill the silence. He simply waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "If I do this, it's not for you, it's for them, including Jaime." "That's all I want," Marcus said. She gave a single nod, then stood, brushing the dust from her dress. "Then we start tomorrow," she said. As they walked away from the courthouse together, the city lights began to glow in the fading afternoon. Neither of them said much on the way back, but Marcus noticed that for the first time in years, the tightness in his chest had eased. That night, Kesha came to the penthouse. Jaime was waiting in the kitchen, thin and pale from the days he hadn't eaten. She took her place at the table, just as she had done at Leonard, and began to hum. Marcus joined her this time. His voice was hesitant, but he followed her melody, watching the boy. Slowly, Jaime reached out and took food from her hand. Then after a moment he reached for his father's hand as well. Marcus fed him, clumsy at first, but learning. Kesha smiled faintly. "See," she said, "it just takes time." Marcus whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Thank you." And in that quiet kitchen, something began again. 6 months later, the old building that once housed the Riverside Learning Center was alive again. Children's laughter echoed in the hallways, climbing the walls like vines reclaiming what had been taken. The brass plaque at the entrance read, "The Whitfield Foundation for Neurodevelopmental Support." Kesha stood in the main classroom, sleeves rolled up, hands streaked with finger paint as she guided a small boy through a messy, joyful art project. The room smelled of crayons and safety. Bright paper cutouts lined the walls, and instead of silence, there was a low, constant hum of activity. Marcus came once a week, always bringing Jaime with him. Today was no different. He stood at the doorway for a moment, watching. Jaime didn't cling to his leg anymore. Instead, he ran ahead, finding his favorite spot by the window, where the sunlight spilled across the floor. Kesha glanced up and gave a nod. "You're late," she said with a small smile. Marcus stepped in, loosening his tie as he walked. "Traffic," he said, "and maybe I like making an entrance." She laughed softly. "That's the CEO in you talking." "It's the father in me," he said, and then crouched next to Jaime, who was already reaching for a brush. For the first half hour, Marcus simply joined in. He followed Kesha's cues, lower his voice, wait until Jaime looked at him, speak slowly, hum if the boy started to fidget. Every time he did these things, Jaime responded. It was like decoding a language that had been hidden from him, one he now wanted to learn fluently. During a quiet moment, Marcus leaned closer to Kesha. He said, "I don't know if I've ever thanked you properly." "You've said thank you a dozen times," she replied, not looking away from the little boy painting with wide, careful strokes. "I mean it every time," Marcus said. They worked side by side until Jaime, his small face streaked with color, pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was a drawing. 3 figures holding hands under a sky full of stars. He handed it first to Kesha, then to his father. Kesha crouched to meet his eyes. "Tell me about this, Jaime," she said gently. Jaime pointed at the first figure. "Daddy," he said, then the second. "Mama Kesha." Then the third, tapping his own chest with a paint-stained finger. Me. Family. The word hung in the air like a bell. Marcus felt his throat tighten. For so long, he had lived in glass towers, surrounded by people who feared him, but never once in all those years had a single word meant as much as the one his son had just spoken. He said quietly, "That's the best thing anyone has ever given me." Jaime smiled a little, then turned back to his drawing as if the work wasn't finished yet. Kesha glanced at Marcus and saw the wetness in his eyes. "You're getting better at listening," she said softly. "I had a good teacher," he replied. They stayed in that sunlit room until the day began to fade. Parents arrived to collect their children, laughter spilling out into the street. Jaime stayed close, showing his father the patterns he had drawn. Circles, stars, tiny shapes that finally had meaning to someone else. When the room was quiet, Marcus walked over to the small plaque mounted on the wall. It read, "In memory of all the children we forgot to see, and in honor of those who saw them anyway." Keisha came up behind him. "You wrote that," she said. "I meant every word," Marcus said. "It's the least I can do." Outside, the sky was turning gold. Jaime ran ahead of them, his shoes tapping out a rhythm on the pavement. For once, Marcus didn't feel the need to control the world around him. He let the rhythm carry him forward. At the car, Jaime looked back. "Daddy," he said. "Sing?" Marcus crouched and answered with a small smile, "You start it and I'll follow." Jaime began to hum. Kesha joined in, her voice gentle, and Marcus followed. Together, the three of them walked into the evening with a melody that was no longer just hers or his, but theirs. And as the city lights blinked on around them, Marcus understood at last. The language had been there all along. He had just needed to learn how to hear it.